Hello, everyone, and welcome to reality. I'm here with William, as usual. I'm Lev.
Hello, everyone.
Today, we're going to be talking about an oil spill in Peru. So, there was an oil spill in Peru back in January 15th. It occurred in the town of Callao in Peru. And it occurred after a tsunami that was caused by a volcano eruption in Tonga. And Tonga is across the Pacific, so it was a far distance. And reportedly, the tsunami caused water swells, and then the ocean swell caused a oil tanker spill in Peru. The oil was owned by a company called Repsol. Repsol is based in Madrid, in Spain. It occurred near an oil refinery, and originally there was reported 6,000 barrels of oil spilled. The company reports now about 10,000. Peru claims that there were 12,000 barrels spilled, and there are about 460 square miles affected. So this affected fishermen and others who work there. And of course, fishing is a big part of Peruvian economy. Do you have anything else to add, William?
Yeah, just that this was said to be the largest ecological disaster in Peru's recent history. And we're looking at this with an interest towards responsibility and rights. How should we evaluate this disaster in terms of who's responsible for the spill and the damage, and whether anyone's rights were actually violated? So that's kind of our interest in it. There is a lot of information that we don't know. Like a lot of the basic facts are, given to us by the company or the government, and we don't really have a kind of independent investigation we can look at and get some hard facts. So
There's a
it's
number of disputed facts anyway, so it's hard to say who's right.
yeah. So the main issue is that we're concerned with, which doesn't really rely on a whole lot of objective facts, is just who's responsible in this sort of natural disaster situation. They said this is like 1,000-year event, right? The Tonga eruption was 1,000-year event, and who can plan for such a thing, right? And so when these things happen, how do you assign blame, and who's responsible for all the damage caused, and how do rights get involved here?
Yeah, I think this case provides evidence of it explains what is relevant to these sort of questions. It brings to light the reality of what happens in these situations. And it's not as clear cut as saying that you dump some chemicals upriver, then went downriver and damaged somebody's property. It's not as simple as that. I mean, this is a multinational corporation against a government, and we're considering multiple people being affected, and both the company and the people who live there. So it's not as straightforward as we think.
And there is the issue of human error. The company is being blamed for not reporting the spill, and the government is being blamed for not issuing a tsunami warning. So there are attempts to assign some sort of responsibility to both sides. So there's that question that gives some more context to the situation. There's also the issues of this being Peru, and they have a socialist president, I believe now, or a socialist government. So there's this issue of corruption and whether they even respect rights, property rights. So
Well, I
how
want to
does
clarify something about that.
sure.
So even before there was a socialist president, in the past few years, there's been like 6 presidents in Peru in the past few years. They're all arrested for corruption, like bribery related corruption, like looking the other way or over ignoring the law and things like that for money.
Right.
And that was even before there was a socialist government. So corruption is inherent in the Peruvian government. You also
Yeah, and
wonder
then
if
that,
it's still there and can we rely on them to be reliable, or to what extent are they someone that can make a judgment about who deserves what?
yeah, so that's a mystery as well. We don't really know if what's going on in the backroom deals, and each side might be working out some deal that is like extrajudiciary, when really this should be taken to court. They're going to try to avoid going to court maybe and just get some handouts. Maybe people are being paid off. Who knows? This is the sort of thing that happens when you don't have an honest government.
Yeah, and it's also like a developing country as well as a lot of South America. So it's not as straightforwardly respectable as we'd expect. Like in the US, we can maybe have a higher standards of our government, but in poorer countries or less strong governments, corruption is a real concern. So as far as
Right.
responsibilities go, it's hard to say. Like, I mean, you could say the government's partly responsible for the way things turn out in the country. Like to the extent the way they take care of their country could affect things that happen.
Right. And we also aren't real clear on the regulations that were involved in this. We're not sure if the company took reasonable precautions, took measures against tsunami waves hitting the refinery. So it's not clear exactly how they may have violated rules, and that may have caused some of the spill. And there's also on the government side, we're not sure if they tax the company for emergency situations like this. And so maybe it would be the government who should be paying the company and giving them relief instead of them demanding payment from the company. So it's all kind of a mishmash of questions and confusions, and not really knowing what the standards are there and what the rules are and the regulations.
Yeah. I think we should go over more specifically the open questions that we have. One of our main questions was, to what extent was there human error involved? But regardless of what some of the disputed facts are, we know for sure there was an oil spill, allegedly is caused by an ocean swell that caused the damage. And this swell caused damage to the environment in a way that even affected livelihoods of people who live there. And it's spread over a wide area. So it's not just something that we can ignore. And if there is responsibility, we want to bring them to justice. If we say it's merely natural, well, there's no one to bring to justice. It's just you deal with it as you can. So we might ask first, like, in what way was Repsol prepared for such disasters? Should they be prepared for such disasters? What do you think, William?
I'm thinking that this may be a situation where they were just like in the wrong place at the wrong time. Like they were in the middle of unloading this tanker when the tsunami hit. But if there is some sort of human error, it seems like it would be on the government side, because the government didn't issue a tsunami warning. And I imagine there's some procedure in place for that, for the company to shut down operations when there's a tsunami warning. So it seems like the company was expecting the government to give them this warning. And when they didn't receive the warning, they just continued their operations. But then on the other hand, you'd kind of expect that the company would know about the volcanic eruption, and they would have some sort of responsibility to take precautionary measures themselves, without the government saying there's a tsunami warning. It's sort of their responsibility to be aware of what's going on in the ocean. So it's hard to say. Both sides seem to be responsible in this small way, in like being unaware of the possibility that there's a tsunami coming, which seemed kind of obvious. Like there were warnings issued to Hawaii, I think, and to other regions in the Pacific.
I'm wondering though, to what extent do you think it's proper that we can expect governments to initiate warnings? I mean, do you think that's like a proper role for them, or do you think that it just happens to be Now, in Peru's case, you could rely on it, but shouldn't have to have that. That it should be the company's primary responsibility always.
Well, it is the government's job to protect the homeland from
Yeah.
disasters. I guess it would be in their general responsibility of, the natural disaster of that magnitude is something you'd expect to be like a national concern.
Yeah.
So if it's not the government doing it, it would be some private company that offers that service.
Right.
But since we do have the government taking on that role, it's their responsibility, I guess.
I mean, at least in this case, we can say it that way. When you could think about the ideal, what this is, how it is in Peru right now, anyway. And as far as responsibility, of course, we could ask, like, what was on the tanker? Could they have prevented it? Or is a tsunami such a rare, or even such an event, such a rare occurrence that there is no rational expectation to expect it? So there is nothing they could have done. The question is, maybe is there anything else the company could have done that should have been sufficient? Were they failing to take certain precautions that should exist anyway? It just so happened that there was a water swell, but maybe there would be damage no matter what. It's just waiting to happen.
Possibly, but let's take the government out of it for now, and let's say that the government wasn't involved in predicting tsunamis.
Okay.
So then it would be the tanker company. It's their job to make sure their tanker is safe and doesn't spill oil all over the place. And when they're out in the middle of the ocean, they're not going to be able to rely on some government to come save them from waves. So they should have some ability to communicate, with the ship out at sea.
I think it was on the coastline
satellite
anyway.
technology. Yeah, and they're on the coastline anyway, so they can just radio each other.
Yeah.
So an important fact, I think, is that we can do some math. I did some math here and figured out how long approximately it would have taken the tsunami to go from Tonga to Peru, and it would be about 13 hours. So they had many hours to think about this, and to figure out where the waves would go and how long it would take and how strong they might be. And they ended up being pretty strong. It was 2 meters high. The waves were 2 meters high when they reached the shores of Peru, and they're traveling around 20 miles per hour, I think. Somebody dropped the ball, I think. The fact that there were tsunami warnings issued in all the other regions around Peru says something about the failure of Peru and the people in Peru and the company there. Something happened. There was some sort of miscommunication, or someone's made a miscalculation. Something happened. So obviously, smart people around the rest of the countries around them figured it out.
I want to mention one reason it would be hard to judge responsibility. Suppose Repsol is up to blame, or suppose any company, if they were up to no good, I mean, if they were going to be legally at fault, say, and they were intentionally doing something wrong, say on the level of Enron, imagine a company like that, they had bad intent. If there's a company with bad intent, a good place to go to avoid responsibility would be poorer countries. Of course, because either poorer countries' governments are more corrupt by nature because they're poorer countries, or the government doesn't have enough money to enforce the laws. Say smaller companies would have a hard time enforcing the laws on large corporations. Say imagine Peru against Amazon. It'd be hard for Peru to enforce themselves. I mean, assuming Amazon was up to no good, but that isn't the case. But say imagine a company of that scale. So if there was malintent here, I don't know if we could ever decide that, because it's a poorer country, so it's hard to say In what way, as we were mentioning before, maybe there's people in cahoots with each other. And that's not intended as a conspiracy, but just that it's a relevant consideration if we were to have a court case about it.
That could be the situation. I mean, I don't know. I would assume that Repsol operates in other countries. They're a big corporation.
Yeah. So it's unlikely, but we could still ask that question, I think, because like by nature of it being difficult to answer, I mean, it's one of those difficulties about judging
Yeah.
responsibility.
They probably just have they developed some contacts in Peru, and
Yeah.
they just happened to, Peru wanted their oil. And so
it's probably as simple as that.
If Peru were, say, like in America, companies that, import oil, they might have higher standards and can charge more because Americans are richer and can pay more for gas. But in Peru, if they're poorer, they can only pay a certain amount for gas. And so you get lower standards. And then maybe a company like Repsol doesn't take it as seriously, and maybe they do skip some steps and take on greater risk. But we'd have to wait for an investigation for that. I don't. Yeah. That's just speculating, I guess.
Right.
And we can't really know.
Another question we want to ask is like, to what extent are rights violated in this case? Or to what extent can we ask, were their rights violated?
Yeah, so this is a tough one because it's sort of an emergency situation, like a natural disaster. It's hard to assign rights here, like who has a right not to be affected by a natural disaster. It's hard to say. When you live in a society, you kind of assume certain risks. This is my kind of theory of like a social contract almost, where you just kind of assume that if some things happen to the society in general, well, you're part of that society and you accepted those risks. You know that if you rely on oil, you're going to have oil companies, and they're going to have to be offloading oil from their tankers into their refineries, and there might be a disaster, and your beaches might get all covered in oil. You try to prepare for these disasters at the societal level or governmental level, and then you have a fund to clean it up or to deal with it. But I don't know how you assign blame in terms of rights violations. It's like I said, it's like 1,000-year disaster. It's kind of something you can't really anticipate.
The best starting place is an analogy I can think of. Like I'm imagining, say, during a hurricane, well, not a hurricane, but a thunderstorm, that in your yard a tree falls down and hits your neighbor's house. I mean, in one sense, you could be responsible if you didn't do anything to take any precaution. And that landed on your neighbor's house and it caused damage. Because thunderstorms are a normal thing, and you should expect that things could happen to your tree. But on the other hand, suppose you did take the precautions and tied it down, and it still fell. I mean, could you blame that person necessarily for the tree falling?
I don't think you could blame the person. It's the hurricane's fault, right?
Yeah.
If the person did everything he could to keep the tree healthy and maintained, he's not really the one to blame for the tree falling, but it is still his tree. It's his property causing damage to someone else's property. So it's not like he's not responsible for the damage his tree caused. But did he violate someone's rights? That's like a separate question, right? I'm not sure. Maybe this is a more fundamental question: is damaging someone's property inherently a rights violation? Because you could, like, there's accidents, right? And you're not really violating someone's right. It's just it's an accident.
Yeah, it would be in every case. I mean, it's not like we're ignoring that there would be sometimes gross negligence, like, see, if you're driving a tanker and you were drunk and you hit something, well, yeah, a person's responsible. You can call that a violation of rights very easily, because someone used property to cause damage to another person's property. It's like physical violence to it, caused by malintent or gross negligence.
So you are responsible for any damage you cause, but I wouldn't say it's like a criminal act unless there is some negligence.
Well,
Like
I
you're
guess
saying,
that's
like,
where you get into like civil law, tort law, things like that. I mean, it is in the domain of rights, but I mean, I guess violation could be a stronger word than say impacting the rights, because I mean, property damage is like more an indirect impact on one's rights is not like direct in the same sense as say shooting someone with a gun on purpose without reason. And
I
that's a
think if
more
it's an,
immediate violation than say radiation caused somebody to get cancer and die in like 10 years.
yeah, I guess if the damage caused is a result of any choice you made, like it can be linked to a bad choice you made, then that might be rights violation. But let's say you, like in the tree falling on the house example, all your choices you made were good to keep the tree alive, and maybe the tree was there before you bought the house and you didn't even choose to plant it. So you're not even responsible for choosing to plant it, but you're responsible for choosing to keep it in its location where the hurricane then tipped it over onto the house. So I guess it boils down to some bad choice you made, like negligence, that sort of thing. And then you're kind of violating someone's right.
Yeah.
Because they have a right to not be affected by your bad choices. I guess. I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Well, I wouldn't say
More.
not affected by it, but just not your property or your body is not affected by it.
Well, they have a right not to be damaged by your bad choices.
Yeah, it's not like if somebody spoils the season finale of The Wire or something that you then say your rights were violated because it caused you psychological pain.
And when you live in a society, you assume some effects from other people that you might not like. Like someone might smell bad in an elevator. He's not violating he's not violating your right. You know, you just accept that people have BO, and you have to live with that. You know, you mentioned the house analogy. In California, where I live, you can have like a chimney during an earthquake fall on somebody, or like a freeway collapse during an earthquake and kill people. So that's another example where there's this natural disaster and you probably didn't do anything wrong, but your chimney or your bridge fell on somebody and killed them. So I would say, that's an unforeseeable event. And also it's not due to any like negligence on the bridge builder's part or the house builder's part. It's just this big earthquake happened and the construction couldn't withstand it. And that's kind of what you accept when you live in a society, is that things are going to fall down during an earthquake.
Well, although the thing to consider is that earthquakes do happen in California enough that people design buildings to withstand toppling like skyscrapers. So it's hard to say exactly where the line to draw is between a disaster that's reasonable to expect versus a disaster that you could never expect. Like an earthquake here in New Jersey would be almost unheard of, and if that caused damage to someone, I think you'd usually be absolved of any responsibility because you wouldn't even predict it. But in California, it'd be different because they do happen sometimes. In the same way you would never expect a blizzard in, say, Arizona, but if there ever was a blizzard in Arizona, then it's not like you could be responsible for what happens then. It would be so bizarre for it to happen.
Right. So I guess each area would have some standards, building codes, and local governments will have regulations about this. And so if you keep your construction within code, I guess that would absolve you of some responsibility.
Yeah.
But like I said before, if it's your property causing damage, then you can't escape all responsibility.
Yeah, you could have partial responsibility. I mean, that would exist.
This is why some people can get insurance. So you have fire insurance, you have earthquake insurance. This can help with the costs of causing other people damage during these natural disasters. But if the government's taking on the role of providing such insurance, they have like emergency relief funds for tornado disasters. And if there's a state or national disaster declared, then I think you're eligible for some relief. And that's kind of the model we have in America for dealing with damage caused by natural disasters. So I don't know if Peru has the same sort of model, but I think that's probably a good model. I'm not sure how you would get people to contribute to the fund. I think it probably should be, voluntary. I'm not for involuntary taxation. In California and other states, they have a lottery to support education.
Yeah.
So maybe they could have, lotteries to support natural disaster relief.
Mm-hmm. I think that covers really all the things we want to discuss about the oil spill.
Yeah, I think it's a tough question, and there are a lot of mysteries still surrounding this oil spill. So it's hard to answer all the open questions, but I like the general view we've taken here.
Yeah, I like the conversation.
Great. I guess that'll wrap that up for now, and I'll talk to you next time.
Yep. Talk to you next time. Bye, everyone.